Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Michael's Record Collection. Very excited to have back on the show David Cousins from the Strawbs. David was on the show way back on episode 7 to discuss the Settlement album in 2021. And we're here today to talk about the magic of it all, brand new album from the Strawbs. David, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, no problem at all. And it's a pleasure to be back and seeing you again.
It's good to see you. It's been a while, but you obviously kept busy, and this new album, The Magic of It All, came out July 14th. And this is a little bit different. Uh, I mean, you guys have always Strawbs music has always been whatever the Strawbs wanted to make at that time. It's a little bit different. It's got a little bit of a backstory about it because it was recorded largely in Cape Town, South Africa. And I know a little bit about the story from seeing other interviews, but for my audience, tell me a little bit about how this project came about.
Well, Strawbs is a continual evolution. It never stops evolving. The band has always done that and always will do. We were about 2 years ago, my partner, whose son lives in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, or Quebec as it's now called, she said, I'm going over to see Richard. Would you fancy coming over? And I said, I think so. It'd be lovely. I've never been over there. So we booked up to go, and I thought, well, it's 6 weeks' time I'm going. I wonder if I can get any shows over there. So I lined up somehow 4 shows, solo shows, just myself. But then the best bass player in South Africa said he'd like to play with me. So I said, that sounds good. And off we went. And we did 4 shows that were very well received. I had no idea whether anybody would ever remember who on earth I was, because I'd never been to South Africa before. And the last show we did in Stellenbosch, about an hour outside Cape Town, we drew 400 people, which astonished me in the open air. It was a lovely venue. And with only 6 weeks' notice, which is very short for a show, short time. So I was absolutely thrilled. And afterwards, people were coming up and say, do you know, we listened to your records in the 70s. And I had an idea that we'd sold records over there because A&M Records told us, oh, you're selling records in South Africa. But because of apartheid, we just couldn't go.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely delighted with it. Anyway, I was looking to go do some more recording, and I phoned up Skulk, and I said to Skulk Joubert, who was the bass player, and said, look, I want to come over and do some more shows. And he said, well, have you thought of the idea of recording here? And I said, no. He said, well, there's a documentary maker called Neil van der Venter who wants to talk to you about making a documentary about the influence that Strawbs had across the world, and in particular in South Africa. But he would like to base it around recording the new album in a studio in Cape Town. So it all interlocked together, and we found ourselves in Cape Town. And I thought, well, Blue Weaver produced the last album, Settlement, so he ought to come and produce this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And off we went. And there we were. We spent 14 days, consecutive days, from 10 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night in the same studio, recording a whole bunch of new songs. And that is the magic of it all.
That is the magic of it all. Now, what was Blue's reaction when you said, hey, I'm going to go to South Africa and record an album?
Well, Blue lives in Germany.
Yeah.
He said that's a hell of a long way. But he said it sounds very exciting. And he knew a lot about South African music because he had been there before. And he knew a lot about the Guma music and Mango Groove. And so he said that it's a very different musical culture. But the whole way of playing is not, people play the drums, they hit skins on drums, but there's a different feel to the whole way in which they play.
Yeah.
Which became very evident on the very first day.
So Neil's documentary, is that finished now?
No, the documentary is still in progress.
Okay.
And it culminates, the main event is the South African musicians are flying into England at the end of the month. And then in the middle of August, on the 11th of August, beg your pardon, we are playing Crop Ready, the Fairport Convention's Crop Ready Festival in front of 25,000 people with the South African musicians who played, plus Blue Weaver, John Ford, and Brian Willoughby, Catherine Craig. It's an 8-piece band. It's going to be great fun doing, and we're so looking forward to it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Now, John, as I understand, is he the only one that contributed um, remotely to this album?
Yes, he was in New York. He wanted to fly over, but to get from America, the USA, to South Africa is an 18-hour journey. And John just said, it's too much for me. I haven't flown that length of flight for years and years and years. So he said, can I do it remotely? So we said, fine. But we got on well writing songs together on the Settlement album. And I thought, well, and John writes the most wonderful tunes. And he phoned me up and said, I've got this song without any lyrics. Can you put lyrics to it? And about 15 minutes later, I sent him some lyrics back. What do you think of that? And he said, it's wonderful. And it turned out to be the song Our World with a choir on it, which sounded glorious. And then he came up with yet another tune for a Christmas song. Said, look, I haven't finished this off. It was originally in 4/4 time, but we put it into 6/8. And that was Blue's idea. He said, let's change it from the regular 4/4. Let's put it in 6/8. And that became Christmas Ghosts. And so that was John's contribution, but he was singing vocals as well. And it all sounds lovely to me.
Okay. That was the bonus track on the album, as I understand it, right?
They're not really bonus tracks.
No.
The way you've got to look at an album is when we put an album together, the vinyl album is the one that you think of first.
Mm-hmm.
And a vinyl album is constrained to 20 minutes a side. So you have to choose the tracks you want to go on the vinyl album and make sure that running order balances, make sure that the running order feels right, make sure that the keys don't run in where 3 songs are all in the same key, make sure the tempos vary, etc. And it takes a long time planning a vinyl album. And what a lot of people don't know about vinyl is that when the needle is going through the grooves, the treble is coming out of the up and down movement of the head of the record player, and the bass notes are coming from the side to side movement of the bass of the grooves. Now, when you get towards the center of the record, the grooves get narrower and narrower, and that means you can't have tracks with heavy bass in the middle of a vinyl record. So all of that goes into planning the album, the vinyl album. That then left us with 2 tracks, which then became extra tracks, which went onto the CD. So they're not bonus tracks, but the lovely thing about it is it actually sounds like 2 completely different albums, because the vinyl album ends with a melancholy feel with the song Wiser Now, whereas the vinyl album ends with 2 upbeat tracks, The Lady of the Night and The Christmas Ghosts, and sounds as though there's a lot of hope and expectation in the CD, whereas the vinyl album is more reflective.
Hmm. Yeah, and I felt like there were some reflective songs on this album. Do you remember what the first song was that you worked on for this record?
Yes, it was The Magic of It All.
Okay.
We just sat down and they said, what do you want to start with? And I said, oh, I got this song. And I put my guitar in its normal tuning, and then I detuned the bass string to a drop D, which is a very regularly done thing, and started to play the chords. And immediately they fell into a sort of lovely feel and groove to the whole thing. And it took on, it was slightly slower than I'd written it when I was running through it at home, but it took on a lovely, melancholy, almost reflective, not melancholy, but reflective feel. And the song is both a travelogue, talking about the places we've been to around the world, but it's a travelogue and looking back at the career of the band.
Yeah, it's a lovely nostalgic piece, and one of the better songs. It's a worthy title track. I like that you talked about the attention to detail that you have to pay to the running order of the songs, because that's, I think, a lost art for a lot of bands, and it is essential to maximize the listener's experience to get that right. So tell me what you thought of when you decided to make Ready the opening track.
It's difficult to find a good opening track. I toyed between that and the time has come for giving back, and both could have been the opening track. But I decided in the end on Ready because it's a very unusual, not an unusual time sequence, but it's in 7/8, which again you don't really notice unless you start counting it. So you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. But it means that it drives the vocal along much more rapidly than would if it was in straight 4/4. And you don't notice it until the instrumental section comes in, which was actually in 4/4. But it gives a lovely loping feel to the track, and it seemed to be the obvious track to start with. So it was either a straight 4/4 track or something much more interesting in 7/8.
Yeah, and it's interesting also from the perspective of I've heard you speak about this song on another interview about it being sort of from the perspective of an Old Testament prophet.
I'm not that old, I'm not a prophet. Well, some people say. But anyway, no, it's a song that the trouble is there's a lot of movement in the world at the moment.
Mhm.
It's all down to based around water, a lack of water. Because the African countries, the water's drying up in certain regions, and there's a whole migration of people moving towards water. They move towards the next country with water, and then there's also the movement towards prosperity, where people seem to be having a better life. And there's a lot of moving away from war and so on. So there's a lot of migration going on in the world. And so there's that, plus it's almost with the temperature changing as well as it is and going up, and the incredible high temperatures we've had just recently. It's all turning into a climatic sort of possible catastrophe.
Mm.
This could be the end of the world building up. I know it's going to take thousands of years, but it's got this feel about it. And so when you look back on in biblical terms, you look back at cities crumbling, the foundations of cities crumbling, of cities running in blood, etc. So dust turning into blood, who will survive the fire and flood? And then it sort of felt almost like a call and answer, where you've got an Old Testament prophet standing up on top of the mountain and calling out this song, and the people answering back, "We are ready. Are you ready? Are we ready?" And when we do it on stage, I'm sure we haven't played it on stage yet. It's going to be, I hope, just that reflection coming back to us.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned the time has come for giving back. That happens to be my favorite song on the album. Um,
Oh,
this is a you have been involved in charitable endeavors before. Is that kind of what inspired the lyrics to this song, or was there something else specifically that you were going for?
no, it's just the way in which politics is moving, particularly in this country. There's a lot of uh, the political upheaval that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years is quite dramatic. And I reflect on what's going on in the world around me, and that's the story of the Strawbs songs, if you like. The continuity of Strawbs is actually the continuity of the songs as they progress from album to album. And I've always been a songwriter who reflects on what's going on in the world around me. And had I been born 200 years ago, I might have been in the child ballad books, because I write songs about historical events going on, particularly on the album Grave New World, for example, or New World, as the title is, or Grave New World, beg your pardon, the song New World, which was a reflection on the battle between Protestant and Catholic in Northern Ireland. I've always written about that sort of thing. And so it was nothing new to write about that. It's just a reflection on the political situation at the moment. And again, there's an awful lot of very poor people. There's a great gulf between the very, very rich and the very, very poor. And it seems to be getting wider and wider.
What is it about political events and conflicts that sort of in historical events that sort of spurs your muse, that kind of lights a fire for you? Do you know where that interest comes from?
It it doesn't inspire me so much as it is something that actually is happening to me, if you like. I mentioned the song, the Hangman and the Papists. Take that as an example. That's a song about the battle between Catholics and Protestants, where the Protestant king and the Catholic soldier, he refused to show allegiance to the king. But that reflected the situation in Northern Ireland, but it also reflected a situation within my own family situation, where my first dad died when I was 6 months old. My mother married again when I was 6. I was baptized a Catholic, but my brother and sister were baptized as Protestants. And so it wasn't a conflict within the family. It's just that I went to the Catholic Church and my brother and sister went to the Church of England church. So there was, when that battle was going on, the troubles in Northern Ireland, it became very apparent that it just reflected my family situation. So I just sat down and the words just poured out.
Okay. So these when you see them as the personal connection that you have to these events and these periods of time.
Virtually every song is written, every line in every song reflects something that has happened to me recently or historically.
Mm, okay.
They're all written from a personal perspective. And they're a little, I don't write exactly, like a newspaper reporting on it.
Sure.
I cover it up and put little clues in it and let people work it out for themselves. And I think that people like to do that. They would like working out what on earth I'm talking about and putting their own interpretation on it. And that's very rewarding because I used to get more letters. People don't write letters anymore, but used to get letters from people saying, I was in hospital and I was listening to your songs and they were a great comfort to me and helped me to recover from this illness that I had. In fact, there was one young lady from Canada who came all the way over and just knocked on the door at 8 o'clock one evening and said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Well, yeah, sure, come in." And it turned out she'd been in hospital having electrode shock treatment, and she'd listened to the records, and it had cured her, and she wanted to say thank you. So that is a very rewarding thing to happen. And many couples came up to us, especially in America and Canada, to say, we got married to one of your songs. It was Autumn, the first song on Hero and Heroine. And they say the last part of that was our wedding song. Either they marched down the aisle to it or it was their first dance. And again, that's very rewarding to have.
Yeah, I imagine so. It's a fantastic choice too. Um, so we have something new from the Strawbs. We don't often get a lot of new things, but we have some saxophone appearances on this album, especially on All Along the Bay and Slackjaw Alice. So the introduction of the sax is a little something a little different for you guys. How did that sort of start? Whose idea was that? Was your idea or bouncing off of Blue or?
It was a pair of us together. Blue was very familiar, as I said, with South African music, having listened to a lot of it, and said that the sax is one of the primary instruments, and the Guma rhythm, spelled Ghoema, is the South African, or particularly in Cape Town, is the local rhythm. As we were told, if you go up and down the street to any bar or cafe, there'll be Guma music coming out at the door. And so we were aware of that and we wanted to put the flavour of South Africa on it. I came up with a chord sequence. Blue said, well, we ought to do that. We put that chord sequence down. And then I said to Blue, I think we need organ on that. He said, oh, no. I said, no, go on, put some organ on it. And then he said, well, I think we need sax on it as well. And so then it became a good cooperative thing that we did. And Byron Abrahams is an astonishing sax player. And how on earth he comes up with all those harmonies, etc., is remarkable. But there you go. And I've heard many records. And I've always thought it would be nice to have a sax on a song, a Strawbs song. And here we are with two.
There you go. Slackjaw Alice has accordion also, and it gives it a feel like Cajun Zydeco music from like Louisiana. But I don't know if that's coincidental. Is that also sort of reminiscent of that South Africa sound that you've been talking about?
Again, that was reminiscent of the sound. It was the
Yeah.
way in which the drummer played it. And again, then Blue put some accordion on it. And it just sounded, it fitted the track itself. And the track is one of my little songs where you have to work out what it's all about. And the clues are in there. They're not very difficult to pull out. It could be about, say, maybe a politician. It could be about royalty. It could be about financiers. It could be any, you've got to work it out for yourself. And that's what these songs are about. It's, it gets, don't write songs that people can follow it through and make it very simple. But then I contradict myself occasionally and write a song which is very simple, such as, the song which I'm most proud of, Everybody Means Something to Someone.
Okay. And tell me about that one. Why is that one that sticks out as one you're particularly proud of?
Well, it was written, I live about 5 minutes from the sea. I can walk out and down there. And walking along that beach is a very beautiful thing. It's a huge bay, well, miles and miles and miles of it. And you can walk for miles along the bay. And there have been many shipwrecks on that particular stretch of water. And there are little rows of fishermen's cottages, and it's very atmospheric walking down there. And there was an art exhibition some years ago, and there was a little plaque left on the wall by a piece of driftwood carved in it as a fish. And it said, everybody means something to somebody somewhere.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's very nice. So I brought it back home, ran it down to myself, and that was far too long to use. So I just changed that. But then I thought, began to think to myself, we don't communicate with one another these days. Everybody is talking to one another online. You don't send a letter to anybody. You don't pick up the phone anymore. You don't send emails even. So I thought, well, send somebody a note, pick up the telephone and pick up or send somebody a letter. And the song, I then thought, that why not make it a very simple message that people can follow, and maybe they will do just that. And having played the album through, that is the song that people seem to have picked up on as being the one that means the most to them.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one. Paris Nights sounds very autobiographical. I understand this is from your travels personally to that city. What is it about Paris that captures your imagination?
It's just a magical city to visit anyway. But I just happen to live on the beach, and it's the ferries go out of Dover to France, just 5 miles down the road, and it used to be, mind you, very easy to get across on a ferry and go to France and take the car and drive down to Paris. There was a lovely thing to do, or to fly over to Paris, go up to Gatwick Airport, get on a plane and fly to Paris, maybe just for a weekend or for 3 or 4 days. And the city, when you land there, there's something magical about it. It's a beautiful city. The museums are magnificent. And the Notre Dame Cathedral is beautiful. And thank God they're beginning to do it up again now and repair it. And it'll look more better than it ever did, I hope.
Yeah.
But having stood outside it and come back, and about just 3 or 4 months later, the whole place burnt down, was heartbreaking. But the sidewalk cafes are just a totally different experience. The restaurants are different. The whole feel of the city is different. And the people are different. And I speak reasonable French, schoolboy French. It's reasonable French. So I thought I'd stick some French words in the middle of it just for a bit of fun. And we were very popular in Canada. And so I wrote the song Grace Darling and translated that into French. And the last time we played in Quebec City, I introduced the whole song in French and told the story of Grace Darling in French, and then sang it. And you could have brought, well, I could have brought the roof down. The audience absolutely loved it. And so Paris has got something magical for me, and I wanted to put the song on. Plus, Blue, again, plays really traditionally Parisian or accordion on it. It just sounds, you could be in Paris.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about the lineup. Obviously, yourself on vocals, acoustic guitar, electric dulcimer, Blue Weaver, who produced the album, on piano, organ, mellotron, and accordion, John Ford vocals, and they also, Blue and John also contributed a little to the writing. You had 5 musicians from South Africa. Um, how did you find these particular musicians? You already talked about Scott Joubert. What about Kevin Gibson, Byron Abrams, Maurice
Well,
Lotz?
they were all introduced to us by the engineer, Peter Pearson, and Scott. And what is not known, or not particularly understood, is that the album was recorded in the Academy of Sound Engineering in Cape Town. It's a working college for youngsters who want to get into the business, either in radio, television, or in a recording studio. Now, most youngsters these days record on their computers, but they're not used to musicians actually recording in a studio. And so while we were recording the album, we had about a dozen students around us all the time, sitting in the control room, watching exactly what was going on, asking questions of the engineer. Why are you putting echo on that? Why are you recording the drums like that? But also they were helping out with laying the studio out, coming in, changing the microphone positions, setting the whole thing up. And so it was an educational experience, both for the students who were there, but also an education experience for us being with them. Because when we had a break for lunch, we send out for McDonald's and fries and sit there chatting away together about why we were doing it, how do you write songs like that, and talking to them about the music that they like. And so it was a working environment and a great experience to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great that they got to learn from someone like yourself, and I'm sure you took some learning away from that experience as well.
We certainly did, because Peter Pelson, the engineer, was the young engineer who took Paul Simon round South Africa and introduced him to the South African musicians who played on Graceland. They actually recorded the musicians playing music in South Africa, then took that back to New York and cut it up in little segments and dropped it into the tracks. So they took music from South Africa to New York and cut it together, whereas we went over there and did it all in situ.
Yeah.
But it was the same engineer. And so again, although it doesn't sound anything like Graceland, there's the same, there's a link between the two albums.
Yeah, a little shared musical
I
DNA.
mean, I hope we sell a few million copies like Paul Simon did.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? So
Mm.
you did the recording there in September of 2022 in Cape Town, and you did your vocals in October with engineer Dan Lucas at the Joplin House in Kent. Is that correct?
Yeah, when I came back, we started to do vocals over there on the last 2 or 3 days, but I was pretty tired by then. After, as I say, 14 days on the trot, I was absolutely wiped out, and so it was very difficult to sing. So I took 3 or 4 weeks off, and then there's a local studio about 20 minutes from the house here. Went in there and put the vocals down there. And I'm glad I did, because my voice was refreshed by then and I had a chance to listen to the tracks again. And I think the vocals that I've done on this album are the best I've ever done on any album.
Okay. Well, that's high praise from yourself, because you've certainly done a great job throughout your career on your various records. The documentary from Neil, when you were talking to Neil about the influence Strawbs music has had around the world, did you learn some things from him that you had no idea about?
In particular about South Africa, because I had no idea that it was a time of apartheid, and the songs like New World and Part of the Union and oh, I can't remember at the moment, but they were very, very influential songs. And because they were rallying points to the anti-apartheid movement. That was why the songs were so important. But also, as I was saying to you earlier, the songs have had a great deal of influence on not necessarily on other bands, because we've always been shifting and changing and evolving as we moved along. But it was very interesting when we first went to America. Our first tour, we did the touring lineup we came up with, that we were put on. The headline act was Santana. The second act was Joe Walsh, and then the Strawbs were third. We went on first. So that was an incredible experience for us to watch people that we'd heard of. Well, not necessarily so much Joe Walsh, but Santana we obviously knew of. And Carlos Santana used to stand on the edge of the stage and watch us every night. He was absolutely fascinated by the mellotron, and he couldn't understand how we got the sound we did, which was the way in which the guitar played along in chord progressions with the mellotron. He was absolutely fascinated. And I remember going out to lunch in San Francisco, not to lunch, for breakfast actually, with Carlos Santana and John McLaughlin, just the three of us, and talking about how we got our sound and so on. That was absolutely fascinating. So we have had an influence from that sort of point of view as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, that's three very distinctive styles of music on that tour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, when somebody
The,
buys
the,
this,
the, the next tour, by the way, it was Billy Preston headlining and Strawbs on with Billy Preston. Can you imagine that? That
oh
was a
man.
very odd lineup.
Yeah. When somebody buys the magic of it all and listens to the CD or to the record and start to finish, what do you kind of hope that they take away from that experience?
I hope they take away the atmosphere. The flow is designed to flow all the way through. And there are little subtleties in it, such as the end of uh, Before Paris Nights, we were doing Snack Drawer Alice, which is she lives in Paris. So there's a little link like that. But it's the atmosphere of the whole record. You can't just listen to one track and say, well, that's the album. It all sounds like that, because it
Mhm.
doesn't. Far from it. All the tracks sound very different. But when they all go all the way through, they tell a story. Not an open. It's not a concept album,
Mhm.
but it's got an atmosphere and a flow to it and a feel. And you really have to listen to the album two or three times before you get into the atmosphere of it. And that's what I hope people will do. Not listen to it once and say, "Oh, doesn't sound like Strawbs album this time," but have a listen to it and get into it. And that's what I find is happening. People are writing now on Facebook and saying, I've listened to it half a dozen times and I'm now beginning to understand what the sound is.
Okay. Okay. So what is next for David Cousins? What is next for the Strawbs? I mean, you did this album a year ago, and here we are getting it out. And you've already talked about the live performance, but what else is going on with you?
Well, I've got a medical condition which was diagnosed in January, which is called MDS, um, hang on, myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a rare blood disease. And it means that my immune system is very, very compromised. So I can't go out touring. In fact, my last show on stage will be on August the 11th. After that, I'm going to concentrate on just recording and writing more songs and making more Strawbs albums.
Well, that sounds lovely for all of us that are Strawbs fans. Have you already started with the writing? Have you already got some notes and some
I'm
stuff down?
continually dreaming up new ideas. Since the album came, well, just about the time the album was finished, I came up, well, my partner Marianne, her granddaughter in South Africa, Marianne said, I think we ought to do a song for the water conference, the United Nations Water Conference in New York in 3 months' time. And maybe you could write a song with Kendra, a 15-year-old girl in South Africa, about water. And so we communicated by Zoom calls. And the whole point of it, I said to Kendra, now tell me what your favourite track is. And believe it or not, she came up with Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. I said,
Okay.
is your favourite track? She said, yeah. And so I said, well, the rhythm goes, everybody wants to rule the world. And started to play the guitar in that rhythm. And once we had that rhythm feel going, I knew that that was how the song was going to go. But I wanted her to write the lyrics. So it was an educational experience again, because I said, I think we ought to write about you. You live in, there are not zoos, but nature reservations all around you. There are giraffes everywhere, warthogs, rhinos. I said, we ought to write about animals. I said, also, you can look out to sea from your bedroom window and see whales in the bay. I said, we've got to write about this. And so we started to write. And so we put the whales in. And then I said, well, what about the giraffes? And so I said, how do they drink water? How on earth do they bend down to do that? And so she got her computer out and looked it up. And she said, giraffes drink water upside down. I said, do they? She said, yes, they have to bend their necks, put their heads upside down in the water, then raise their necks up and swallow the water. So we put that line in the song, giraffes drink water upside down. And we wrote that song. And about 2 months ago, it was played at the United Nations Water Conference in the General Assembly to the community, to the gathered delegates. It was played by the minister, South African Minister for Sanitation and Water, and he played it. And at the end of it, we were watching it on the screen as he was doing it. There was a ripple of applause that grew into a lovely burst of applause from the delegates. I thought, that is satisfaction. Writing a song with a young 15-year-old girl and getting it played at the United Nations.
That's an amazing story. That's congratulations. That's awesome.
Well, it was lovely. We were going to put it on the album, but because the actual recording was done by the school choir and the school band playing marimbas, it didn't sound like a school track. It sounded like a bunch of school kids. But Blue produced it and recorded it, and it sounded magnificent.
Okay.
You
This
should look
is
it up. The Water Song, and it's the Commonwealth Medical Trust is the link to go for. Commonwealth Medical Trust, COMMAT, COMMAT, the Water Song.
that's great. And that's, I believe that's an organization that does that installs like water I'm forgetting the word, but they help people retain water and have
Yeah, well, we put water tanks into
that's it, tanks. That's the
into
word I was looking for.
remote villages in Uganda in particular. And the thing is that during the rainy season, fine, they've got water, but they live on top of a mountain. A lot of these villages are remote and on top of mountains. And when there is no water, they have to walk down the side of the mountain, which is a 2-hour walk to a lake, which is a pretty green lake. They pick up water and then have to carry it back on their heads for another 2 hours back to the village. That means that the young children can't be left behind, so they have to go with their mothers, and they can't go to school, so it's affecting their education. So in putting water tanks in, it means that we're helping the education of young children, which I think is a very worthwhile thing to do. And also, in the rainy season, what is not understood either is that the nearest hospital is 7 kilometers away, and the women, when they're getting ready in labour, have to be carried on litters to the hospital by the men of the village on over their heads through the mud to get to the hospital for the women to give birth. And so with us putting water in, that means that you never know, sanitation may come to the village at some time, and that's what we're hoping for.
That's a great cause. Amazing. Um, David Cousins, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you telling me about this new record. It's called The Magic of It All. Came out July 14th. Cherry Red Records. You can get it there. You can keep up with everything the Strawbs doing on the website. And thank you again for coming back on the show, telling me about this. It's been a lot of fun.
I'll just hold the record up for you to see.
Oh, it's beautiful. Oh yeah, that's one thing I want to ask you about. Tell me about the artwork for this.
It was taken by Marianne's, my partner's son. He's a professional photographer. It's his favorite photograph, and I said to him, I want a picture of the sunrise or sunset in South Africa, and that was the picture he came up, and that's the one we've gone with.
And who's on the motorcycle?
That was a friend of his.
Okay. That's
it
great.
Wasn't me.
Well, I wouldn't have been surprised if it was, David. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And best of luck with the record.
Michael, it's been a pleasure talking to you.